The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Tuesdays, in my 82nd year, were for quietude and tea, for the gentle rustle of the morning paper and the soft, dusty light that fell through the bay window of my study. The envelope was thick, legal-sized, and bore the crisp, impersonal logo of a prominent tech journal. I almost set it aside, a relic of a professional life I had long since put to bed. But curiosity, that last flickering candle in the mind of an old man, prompted me to slit it open. Inside was a glossy feature on the innovators of the year. I skimmed it with a detached eye until a full-page advertisement stopped me cold. It was for Coal-Tech Industries, and it showcased their new AquaPure Genesis system, a revolutionary water filtration unit for remote and underdeveloped communities. Harnessing a legacy of innovation, the copy boasted, based on original company designs from our archives. And then I saw the patent drawings. My hands, which had held tools and blueprints steady for 6 decades, began to tremble. The paper rattled like a dying leaf. The world, my quiet study with its shelves of books and models, the very air I breathed, seemed to shrink to a single pinpoint focus on those schematics. It was my father's heart, my father's soul, laid out in cold corporate ink. The central mechanism, a beautifully simple, dual-chambered valve system that used alternating pressure gradients to filter particulates without any electrical input, was unmistakable. He'd called it the Glant pulse flow. I'd watched him whittle the first prototype from scrap wood on our kitchen table. A sound escaped my lips, a dry, rusted thing that was half sob, half laugh. 50 years. I had carried the weight of his betrayal for 50 years, a lodestone of quiet grief around my neck. I had built a life around it, used it as a foundation instead of letting it crush me. And in one moment, seeing that arrogant, polished lie presented as a new marvel, the weight transformed. It was no longer grief, it was purpose, sharp and clear and colder than river ice. Time, I have learned, is not a thief, as the poets so often claim. It is a glacier. It grinds down mountains of passion into plains of patience. It carves canyons of resolve from the soft rock of impulse. The furious, hot-blooded boy I had been at 17 would have stormed their offices, screaming accusations. That boy had been tempered. He had been annealed in the slow fire of decades. He had become me, and I had something that boy and his father had never possessed: evidence, and the absolute, unshakable will to see this through to its very end. I stood, my knees protesting the movement, and walked to the old oak filing cabinet that stood in the corner, a silent sentinel from another era. The key was on my key ring, a small, tarnished brass thing I had carried since I was a young man. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk. The drawer slid open, releasing the scent of old paper and memory. There, in pristine condition, protected by acid-free folders, lay my arsenal. My father's original hand-sketched blueprints, smudged with grease and the sweat of his brow. His workshop diaries filled with his cramped, earnest script, detailing every failure and every tiny, hard-won success. And most damning of all, the contract.
the single sheet of paper that had signed away his dreams, bearing the flamboyant, now loathsome signature of Henry Cole.
I laid the documents out on my wide desk, the modern advertisement beside the ancient evidence. The betrayal was no longer a story I told myself in the dark of night. It was a fact, laid bare and undeniable. Henry Cole was long dead, dust in a marble crypt, but his company lived on. His name was still celebrated. His grandson, Richard Cole, a man whose smug, polished face I had seen in business magazines, was now the beneficiary of that original, foundational theft. The anger was there, a deep, resonant hum in my bones, but it was a controlled burn. This was not about rage. This was about restoration. My father hadn't wanted to be a millionaire. He'd wanted to see his idea, his little piece of goodness, help people. He'd wanted to provide for his family. He'd wanted his name to mean something. "All right, Dad," I whispered to the quiet room, my voice steady. "It's time. We're going to take it back." The memory of that first betrayal is not a ghost that haunts me. It is a stone I have carried so long it has become part of my skeleton. I can close my eyes and be there, in the perpetual twilight of our small garage workshop, the air thick with the smells of motor oil, sawdust, and my father's cheap tobacco. His name was William Grant, and to my 8-year-old eyes, he was a giant. Not in stature, but in quiet capability. He had a mechanic's hands, broad, strong, permanently etched with grime no scrub brush could reach, but a philosopher's mind. He could listen to the sputter of an engine and diagnose its melancholia. He could watch a bird on a wire and sketch a more efficient pulley system. And he was obsessed with water. "It's the lifeblood, Eli," he'd tell me, using the nickname only he ever used. "Clean water. It shouldn't be a luxury. It's a right." The pump was his masterpiece. It started as a jumble of copper pipes and salvaged valves on his workbench. Over years, it evolved. I was his apprentice, his little foreman, holding wrenches, fetching coffee, and watching as he solved problems that would have stumped a university-educated engineer. The final design was breathtaking in its simplicity. A hand crank drove a piston, creating a vacuum that pulled water through a sand and charcoal filter, then expelled it, clean, through a clever one-way valve system. It required no electricity, no complex parts. A village blacksmith could build one. The day it worked, truly worked, pumping clear, sweet water from a bucket of mud-clogged slurry, he didn't cheer. He went quiet. He placed a hand on the humming metal housing, his eyes shining with a wetness I now recognize as a profound, almost sacred pride. "This is it, son," he said, his voice thick. "This is how we change our luck." Our luck needed changing. We were poor in the way that is quiet and constant, a background hum of anxiety. The roof leaked, the car was unreliable, my mother's smile was becoming a rare commodity. So when my father heard of Henry Cole, a man of means with investments in progressive utilities, he saw a doorway. I remember the day Henry Cole came to our house. He arrived in a gleaming butter-yellow Packard, a machine so out of place on our dusty street it might as well have landed from Mars. He was a big man, not with my father's laborer's solidity, but with the soft bulk of a man who ate well and often. He wore a suit that cost more than our furniture, and a gold watch chain spanned his waistcoat. His handshake was a practiced, encompassing thing. "William," he boomed,
his voice too large for our small parlor. "I've heard marvelous things. A pump, they say, that defies physics." My father, in his clean but faded overalls, was like a sparrow in the shadow of a hawk. He was nervous, eager to please. He led Cole to the garage. I followed, a silent shadow.
Cole watched the demonstration, his head cocked. He didn't say much. He asked a few technical questions, his eyes sharp, missing nothing. When my father finished, beaming with hopeful pride, Cole placed a heavy, patronizing hand on his shoulder. "William, this is remarkable, truly. It's rough, of course, needs refinement, but the core principle, it has legs. It could help a great many people and make you a very wealthy man." I saw the hope bloom in my father's face, a painful, beautiful flower. "You think so, Mr. Cole?" "Henry, please, call me Henry." He smiled, a wide, toothy affair that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Here's what I propose. I have the resources, the legal team to patent this properly, the factories to produce it, the distribution to get it into every farming community, every remote village in the country. You provide the genius, I provide the engine. Partners." He used words like partners and shared vision. He spoke of legacies and changing the world. He was a master of painting a future so bright, my father was utterly blinded. A week later, my father signed the papers Cole's lawyer brought over. He signed them with a flourish, his heart in his throat, believing he was securing our future. He didn't have the money for a lawyer of his own. He trusted. The months that followed were a slow, agonizing slide from hope into dread. Cole became elusive. Phone calls went unreturned. My father's buoyant optimism began to deflate. Then, a year almost to the day after Cole's visit, the news broke. Cole Manufacturing was launching the Cole Vital Flow pump. There was a full-page ad in the local paper, and a picture of Henry Cole, beaming, standing next to a polished, chrome-plated version of my father's invention. The world did not end with a bang, but with the slow, quiet crumbling of a man. The light in my father's eyes went out. The humiliation was a physical blow. Neighbors who had cheered him on now looked at him with pity, or worse, mockery. The fool who gave away the century. He tried to fight, of course. He went to Cole's office, was turned away by a smug secretary. He wrote letters that were never answered. He grew thin and quiet. The workshop gathered dust. He died 3 years later. The doctor called it a heart attack. I knew it was a broken heart. At his funeral, a handful of people stood in the rain. Henry Cole was not among them. He was, the papers reported, on a business trip, expanding his new pump empire. That was the day the boy died, and the man with a singular, patient purpose was born. Standing by that fresh grave, the mud sucking at my good shoes, I made a promise to the cold, still earth. It wasn't a shouted oath. It was a quiet, internal seal set deep within me. I will learn everything he knew, I vowed, and everything he didn't. I will learn about engineering and business and law. I will become the man he needed by his side. And I will wait. However long it takes, I will make this right. I will get your name back." The years unspooled, a tapestry woven with threads of quiet determination. I buried my rage, not extinguishing it, but banking it like a fire in a hearth, a source of constant, usable heat. It fueled my studies. While other young men were chasing girls and good times, I was in the library, poring over textbooks on mechanical engineering, patent law, and corporate finance. I earned my degrees, one after another, not with flashy brilliance, but with a dogged, relentless thoroughness that my professors noted as unusual depth. I built a career as a consulting engineer, specializing in failure analysis. It was a perfect fit. Companies would hire me to dissect why their products failed, why a gear sheared, why a circuit shorted, why a bridge groaned. I became a diagnostician of other people's mistakes, a ghost in the machine of industry. I was well respected, but never famous. I avoided the spotlight, cultivated a reputation for quiet, unimpeachable competence. I was building a foundation, a life of unassailable credibility for the one case I knew I would eventually bring.
I never married. How could I ask someone to share a life with a ghost, to understand a devotion to a cause that began before they were born? There were a few kind women, but I could never fully let them in. The core of me was reserved, a locked room containing my father's memory and my promise. It would have been a betrayal to ask anyone else to live in that shadow. My home became my fortress and my archive. In the study, the filing cabinet was my holy of holies. I didn't just preserve my father's documents, I augmented them. I tracked down our old neighbors, the ones who were still alive. I recorded their testimonies, had them sign sworn affidavits about watching my father build the pump. Old Mr. Henderson from down the street, his hands gnarled with arthritis, signed a statement recalling the day my father made the muddy water run clear. "A damned shame what that Cole fella did," he'd wheezed. "Your papa was a good man." I collected everything. Obituaries for Henry Cole that lauded him as a visionary industrialist. Historical articles about coal manufacturing's rise, which always pointed to the vital flow pump as its foundation. I became an expert on my own history, on the crime that had shaped my life. I watched the company, too. Coal manufacturing became Coal Tech Industries, evolving from agricultural implements into broader humanitarian technology. The irony was bitter and perfect. They built their public image on a lie, on the stolen genius of the man they had ruined. Henry Cole died of a heart attack at 70, wealthy and celebrated. I read the news with a cold, detached satisfaction. He had escaped my earthly justice, but his legacy, the company that was his monument, remained. And legacies can be toppled. His son, Henry Jr., took over. He was a less dynamic, more corporate version of his father, but he kept the ship steady. And then a decade ago, the reins passed to the current CEO, Richard Cole, Henry's grandson. I studied him as I had studied his grandfather. He was in his late 40s, a product of business schools and privilege. He had his grandfather's confidence, but none of the rough, pioneering grit. It was a polished, boardroom confidence. He gave TED Talks on ethical capitalism and innovation with a heart. He was frequently photographed at charity galas, a handsome, smiling man who had never known a day of true want or powerlessness in his life. His arrogance was not the loud, boorish kind of his grandfather. It was a quieter, more insidious certainty of his own right to everything he possessed. He was the perfect heir to the throne my father had built. The announcement of the Aqua Pure Genesis was the trigger I had been waiting for. Not only were they still profiting from the original theft, but they were now doubling down on it, using the stolen design as the heritage for a new product line. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. It was the final, unforgivable insult. It was time. My first step was finding the right sword. I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed someone sharp, unafraid of a Goliath, and crucially, one who understood that this was more than a case, it was a crusade. I found him in Arthur Pembroke. He was a few years my junior, a legend in the niche world of intellectual property and historical patent disputes. He was known for his meticulousness and a near-religious fervor for justice. He had taken on pharmaceutical giants and won. His retainer was astronomical, a sum that would have made me balk a decade earlier. But my careful, frugal life had been in service of this moment. I wrote the check without blinking. I brought my life's work to his office, a quiet, wood-paneled space that smelled of leather and old books. I laid it all out on his massive desk, the blueprints, the diaries, the contract, the affidavits, my own chronological documentation.
Pembroke spent an hour in silence, leafing through the pages. He was a small, bird-like man with piercingly intelligent eyes. He finally looked up, took off his glasses, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice soft, "this is extraordinary. The statute of limitations is, of course, a non-issue for a claim of this nature, given the continuous use of the intellectual property and the evidence of fraudulent concealment. The provenance it's impeccable. It's a story, a damned tragic one, but it's also a very, very strong legal case." "It's the only case that matters, Mr. Pembroke," I said, my voice level. "I don't want a quiet, sealed settlement. I want a public ruling. I want his name struck from the patent and my father's put in its place. I want a formal, printed apology. And I want the world to know what Henry Cole did." Pembroke leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a master chess player who has just been shown a beautiful, complex, and winning endgame. "Mr. Grant," he said, "it would be the honor of my career." The lawsuit we filed was a masterpiece of legal precision and narrative power. Pembroke framed it not as a dry patent claim, but as a human story. A tale of a stolen legacy finally being reclaimed after 50 years. We didn't just serve papers to Coltech, we released a curated packet to the press. The Internet, as Pembroke had predicted, caught fire. The headline was everywhere. "Elderly engineer claims tech giant stole his late father's design, seeks justice after 50-year wait." Suddenly, I was not an anonymous old man. I was a symbol. My phone rang incessantly. Reporters camped on my pristine lawn. Microphones were thrust in my face. I granted one carefully managed interview from my study with my father's blueprints displayed behind me. I didn't shout or rage. I spoke quietly, precisely about my father's genius, his hope, and the betrayal that broke him. I let the documents speak for themselves.
The court of public opinion swung hard and fast in my favor. The story had everything: a relatable underdog, a monolithic corporation, a heartless betrayal from beyond the grave, and a quest for justice that spanned a lifetime. Justice for William Grant trended. Memes were made, juxtaposing my father's humble workshop sketches with Coltech's glossy ads. The first response from Coltech was exactly as I'd anticipated. Richard Cole gave a press conference. He stood at a podium with the Coltech logo, his face a mask of condescending bewilderment. "This is a sad and baseless claim from a confused old man," he said, his voice dripping with a faux sympathy that made my jaw clench. "Coltech has a long, proud history of innovation. The AquaPure Genesis is the result of years of R&D by our dedicated team. We have the utmost respect for Mr. Grant's age and his apparent personal history, but we will vigorously defend our intellectual property against this fictional narrative." Confused old man. The phrase was a calculated insult, designed to marginalize me. But it was also a mistake. It made him look arrogant, bullying. The public backlash was swift and brutal. The legal battle began in earnest. Coltech's high-priced legal team, from a firm known for its ruthlessness, tried every trick. They filed motions to dismiss, claiming the suit was frivolous. They argued the original design was obvious and not patentable, a ludicrous claim contradicted by their own company's historic success with it. They demanded every scrap of documentation I had, a blatant attempt to bury us in paperwork and discovery costs. But they had underestimated us. They had underestimated Pembroke's thoroughness, and they had underestimated my preparation. I had spent 50 years preparing for this. I had every document indexed, cross-referenced, and digitized. We provided everything they asked for, a flood of evidence that only strengthened our case. The key moment, the turning point, was the deposition. Coltech's lawyers, a sleek man named Davidson, demanded to depose me. They thought they could break an old man, trip me up on details, expose inconsistencies in a story half a century old. They were wrong. The deposition was held in a sterile conference room. I wore my best suit, the one I'd bought for my retirement dinner. I sat calmly, my hands folded on the table. Pembroke was at my side, a silent pillar of support. Davidson began with a tone of smarmy condescension. "Mr. Grant, your memory of events from 50 years ago seems remarkably vivid. Are you certain you aren't conflating stories you've told yourself over the years with actual fact?" I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eye. "I am certain, Mr. Davidson. The day Henry Cole came to our house was the day my mother washed the good curtains. It was also the day I skinned my knee falling off my bicycle, a fact you can verify with the affidavit from Mrs. Gable, who lived next door and patched me up. She mentions it in her statement, which is Exhibit 42B in your packet. The memory is vivid because it was the day my family's future was stolen. One tends to remember such days with clarity." Davidson blinked. He tried again and again. He asked me about technical specifications, about dates, about conversations. For every question, I had a precise answer, often referencing a specific page from my father's diaries or one of the affidavits. I was not a confused old man. I was the world's leading expert on the crime perpetrated against William Grant.
After 2 hours, Davidson's condescension had evaporated, replaced by a sheen of sweat on his brow. He was flailing. In a last, desperate move, he brought out the contract, the one with Henry Cole's signature. "This document," he said, sliding a copy toward me, "which you claim is the instrument of the alleged theft, is a standard partnership agreement. It assigns the rights to the design to my client's grandfather in exchange for his investment and expertise. Your father signed it willingly." I looked at the signature, my father's hopeful looping script next to Henry Cole's arrogant scrawl. A cold fury, clean and sharp, filled me. But my voice was calm. "He signed it," I agreed. "He signed it because Henry Cole promised him a partnership. He promised him royalties. He promised him credit. He promised him that his name, William Grant, would be on the patent. My father was a mechanic, Mr. Davidson, not a fool. He trusted. The only thing standard about that agreement, sir, is the depth of the deception it represents. The promises made orally were lies. The written terms were a theft. And the signature of Henry Cole on that page is not just a name. It is an admission of fraud." There was a long silence in the room. Davidson slowly gathered his papers. He had nothing left. We had won the war before we ever set foot in a courtroom. The discovery process forced Coltech to open its own historical archives. And there, buried in a box of Henry Cole's old personal files, Pembroke's team found the hammer that would shatter their defense. A private letter from Henry Cole to his lawyer, dated a week after my father signed the contract.
The letter read, "The Grant fool has signed. The pump is ours. Patent it immediately under my name. He hasn't the resources to fight. See that he gets nothing. This device will be the foundation of everything." It was a confession in his own hand. Pembroke called me the moment they received it. "Eli," he said, and I could hear the triumph in his voice, "it's over. They're finished." The news of the letter leaked, as these things do. The public outcry became a roar. Coltech's stock price plummeted. Their ethical capitalism brand was in tatters. Richard Cole, the polished, TED-talking heir, was now the face of inherited theft. The call for settlement talks came not from us, but from them. They were desperate. The meeting was held in Pembroke's conference room. On our side, Pembroke, myself, and a court reporter. On theirs, Richard Cole, his lawyer, Davidson, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and a grim-faced board member. Richard Cole was a changed man. The polished arrogance was gone, replaced by a pale, strained tension. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. I saw not just an opponent, but the living ghost of his grandfather's sin. He couldn't hold my gaze. The talks were brief. Pembroke laid out our terms, the same ones I had given him at the start. Full and public acknowledgement that the vital flow pump and the core mechanism of the AquaPure Genesis were the sole invention of William Grant. The removal of Henry Cole's name from the historical patent registry and its replacement with my father's. A formal printed apology in major newspapers. And financial damages,
a sum calculated not just on back royalties, but on a percentage of the company's historic profits from the pump. A number so vast it was comical.
Davidson sputtered. This is corporate ruin. You can't be serious. We are perfectly serious, Pembroke said, his voice like ice. We are prepared to see this through to a jury trial. I wonder, Mr. Cole, how your "innovation with a heart" slogan will play when I read your grandfather's letter to the jury. Richard Cole held up a hand, silencing his lawyer. He was staring at the table. He looked utterly defeated. "We accept," he said, his voice a hollow whisper. "All of it?" Pembroke pressed. Cole nodded, still not looking at us. "All of it." He finally lifted his head, his eyes finding mine. There was no apology in them, only a shocked, weary resentment. You waited all this time. You built your whole life just for this?" I held his gaze, allowing him to see the 50 years of patient, focused intent in my old eyes. "No," I said quietly. "I built my whole life because of this. There is a difference." He looked away, shamed in a way that went deeper than any legal loss could achieve. The judge formally ratified the settlement. It was the fastest ruling I'd ever seen. Justice, when it finally arrives, can be startlingly efficient.
The check arrived a week later. It was a piece of paper with a number on it that was more money than my father had ever dreamed of, more than I could ever spend. It felt insignificant, a byproduct. The real victory was the press release from Cole Tech, a humiliating, abject document that acknowledged William Grant as the true inventor. It was the sight of my father's name appearing in history articles and Wikipedia pages, finally where it belonged. The day after the check cleared, I did not go to the bank. I drove. I took the long, familiar road out of the city into the rolling hills where the old cemetery lay. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn day, the kind of day that speaks of endings and peace. I found his grave. The headstone was simple, weathered by 50 years of rain and sun. It read, "William Grant, beloved father, 1908-1955. For half a century, that was all the world knew of him. I laid the copy of the settlement agreement and the Cole Tech apology on the cool granite. I knelt, my old bones protesting, and placed my hand on the stone. "It took 50 years, Dad," I whispered, the wind catching my words. "But we got it back. Your name. It's clean now. Everyone knows what you did. Everyone knows who you were." I sat there for a long time, the sun warm on my back, the rustle of dry leaves the only sound. The lodestone of grief and purpose I had carried for a lifetime was gone. I felt light, empty, but in a peaceful way. The fire was out. The account was settled. I didn't want revenge for the money. I wanted his name to be remembered. And now, it always will be.